Hollywood loves a scandal. A car crash, a leaked tape, a public meltdown. Chaos makes money because chaos keeps your name in the headlines. But there is something the industry loves even more than a scandal: silence. We are taught that if you are talented, you rise, and if you are beautiful, you rule. But there is a secret list in Tinseltown, a list of men who didn't fail, didn't break the law, and didn't fall from grace. They simply told the truth, and the machine turned off. Tonight, we aren't looking at the stars who burned out. We are looking at the ones who were extinguished. This is not gossip. This is an autopsy of 10 careers quietly murdered by the straight fantasy. Welcome to the Silent Purge. To understand the crime, you have to understand the weapon. In Hollywood, the most valuable currency isn't talent, it's the fantasy. Studios sell a very specific dream: the leading man. He saves the girl, he kisses the co-star, and he becomes the object of desire for millions of women. But what happens when the leading man stops playing the game? What happens when the mask slips? For these next 3 men, the punishment wasn't a firing squad. It was a slow, cold ghosting. Lee Pace, the king without a crown. Look at Lee Pace. Physically, he is the prototype. 6'5", a voice like velvet, and the range of a legend. From Pushing Daisies to The Hobbit, he was ascending. He was supposed to be the next big Marvel lead, the next Oscar contender. He had it all, except for one thing. He refused to lie, but he also refused to perform. In 2018, the silence broke. In an interview, Lee hesitantly admitted he had dated both men and women. It wasn't a parade, it was a whisper, and that whisper changed everything. Suddenly, the prestige dramas stopped calling. The casting directors for the romantic leads went in another direction. He was trapped in the middle, not flamboyant enough to be a queer icon, but too honest to sell the straight fantasy anymore. Ask yourself, if Lee Pace had lied, if he had played the game, would he be the face of a billion-dollar franchise right now? The industry didn't fire him. They just stopped inviting him to the table. Matt Dallas, the ghost of Kyle XY. If you were a teenager in the mid-2000s, you didn't just know Matt Dallas, you were obsessed with him. Those eyes, that face. As the star of Kyle XY, he was a cultural phenomenon. He was poised for superstardom. And then he vanished. No scandal, no bad behavior, just gone. Why? Because behind the scenes, the ultimatums were flying. Executives allegedly told him, hide it or lose it. They needed the teen girls to believe he was available. They needed the lie. When Matt finally came out years later, introducing his husband and son, he looked happy. But his career? It was a casualty of war. Hollywood decided that a gay man couldn't play a mysterious alien. They ghosted him before he even had the chance to speak. It wasn't a failure of talent, folks. It was an erasure of identity. Jonathan Bennett, the stolen fantasy. His hair looked sexy pushed back. Jonathan Bennett wasn't just an actor. He was Aaron Samuels, the gold standard of the high school crush. After Mean Girls, he should have been the king of rom-coms. He had the charm, the timing, the smile. But the second act never came. Why? Because Jonathan stopped pretending. Here is the brutal truth Hollywood doesn't want you to know. They are terrified of a gay man playing the romantic lead. They sold his face to millions of girls as the ultimate boyfriend. But the moment he came out, they decided the audience wouldn't buy it anymore. He didn't lose his looks. He didn't lose his talent. He lost his utility to the machine. They took the fantasy back because he dared to be real. But if you think these stories are tragic, wait until you see what happens to the men who fought back. Erasure is one thing. Punishment is another. If the first group was erased for breaking the fantasy, this next group was exiled for breaking the silence. You see, Hollywood has a safe gay box. You can be the funny best friend, the fashion consultant, or the tragic victim. But you must always be palatable. You must be easy to digest. But what happens when a queer man refuses to be a sanitized accessory? What happens when he gets loud, gets political, or gets messy? The industry doesn't just ghost them, it recoils from them. Because to the machine, an uncontrollable gay man isn't just a risk, he is a liability. Max Emerson, the algorithm breaker. Enter Max Emerson. On paper, he is an advertiser's dream, shirtless, sarcastic, and ridiculously photogenic. He built a massive following before influencer was even a career path. But Max made a fatal mistake. He refused to be just a pretty face. While brands wanted him to smile and sell protein shakes, Max used his platform to talk about the ugly stuff. He screamed about body dysmorphia. He exposed the sanitized hypocrisy of corporate pride. He directed a film about homeless queer youth. He was loud, raw, and unfiltered. And Hollywood hates unfiltered. They couldn't control him. They couldn't market him without risking a controversy. So, the campaigns dried up. The casting calls for the funny gay neighbor went to safer, quieter actors who wouldn't tweet about systemic oppression. Max didn't fade away. He was algorithmically punished for refusing to be a pet. Andy Mientus, the political threat. Then there is Andy Mientus. If you saw him in Smash or The Flash, you saw a star. He has that rare Broadway electric energy that pops on screen. But Andy committed the ultimate sin in the eyes of a conservative industry. He was political. Andy didn't just happen to be gay. He was queer with a capital Q. He challenged the industry's boring, heteronormative standards. He was married, vocal, and unapologetic about the history of the movement. Hollywood loves a rainbow flag during Pride Month, but they are terrified of the riot that started it. They wanted him to tone it down, to be universal, but Andy refused to shrink. And because he wouldn't play the safe gay, the big network leads stopped coming. He became too niche for the mainstream, a polite code word for too radical. Brands want the rainbow, not the revolution. George Shelley, the broken pop machine. And finally, the heartbreak of George Shelley. As a member of Union J, George was manufactured to be the perfect British boy band heartthrob. The hair, the smile, the innocent charm. He was a product designed to sell millions of records to teenage girls. But George was human, and the machine doesn't account for humanity. When he started to show cracks, when he spoke about fluidity, about loving both boys and girls, about not fitting into a rigid box, the pop machine malfunctioned. He wasn't the straight dream anymore, but he also wasn't the sassy gay icon they could pivot to. He was just a vulnerable young man figuring it out. And the industry, they froze. They didn't know how to sell vulnerability without a label. So they stopped selling him at all. His solo career didn't stall. It was suffocated. George Shelley proves that in the pop world, if you can't be condensed into a simple hashtag, you are worthless to them. But if being loud gets you exiled, and being quiet gets you erased, what happens to the men who are simply too good to ignore, yet still hit a glass ceiling they can't see? Now we arrive at perhaps the most frustrating category of all. These aren't men who were kicked out of the industry. They are men who are kept in the industry, but are forced to hit their heads against an invisible ceiling, over and over again. This is the tragedy of wasted potential. These actors have the skills, the looks, and the charisma to anchor a billion-dollar franchise. But because they are openly queer, the industry puts a permanent asterisk next to their names. They are allowed to work, but they are not allowed to lead. Brian J. Smith, the action hero who never was. Let's talk about Brian J. Smith. If you watched Netflix's Sense8, you know exactly what I'm talking about. As Will Gorski, Brian was the total package, rugged, vulnerable, masculine, and heroic. He had the face of the next Captain America and the soul of a young Harrison Ford. You could see the trajectory forming. He should have been on the shortlist for James Bond. He should have been leading the next Mission Impossible. But in 2019, Brian came out. It was a brave, beautiful moment where he shed the fear he had carried since childhood. He thought it was the beginning of his real life. Instead, it was the end of his momentum. The big studio action scripts, they vanished. The casting directors looked at this incredible actor, who had already proven he could play a straight, tough cop perfectly, and decided the illusion was broken. They couldn't sell a gay man as an action hero to the global market. It is the ultimate hypocrisy. Brian proved he could carry the weight of the world on screen, but Hollywood refused to let him carry a movie. Kevin McHale, the voice in the shadows, and then the quiet tragedy of Kevin McHale. Glee was a cultural juggernaut, and while the cameras often focused on the drama of other characters, Kevin was the show's secret weapon. As Artie, he grounded the series. He was a former boy band member, a trained vocalist, and a natural performer. When the show ended, the cast scattered. Some went on to Broadway, some to movies, some to megastardom. Everyone expected Kevin to soar. But he didn't. He drifted. While his peers were booking Netflix leads and reality hosting gigs, Kevin was relegated to the sidelines. Why? He didn't have a scandal. He came out with grace and joy. But Hollywood suffers from a lack of imagination. Kevin didn't fit the action star mold, but he also didn't fit the sassy sidekick stereotype. He was just a talented, soft, genuine artist. And in a machine that needs easy labels, talented and genuine wasn't enough to get him a second act. He kept singing, but the industry stopped listening. But if hitting a glass ceiling is painful, imagine being trapped in a golden cage. Imagine being given work, money, and fame, on the condition that you never ever let the audience know who you really are. We have seen the erased, the punished, and the ignored. But there is a special kind of hell reserved for the most beautiful among them. It is called the golden cage. In this trap, Hollywood gives you work, they give you money, they give you screen time. But the cost, you must agree to never, ever be more than what they tell you to be. Luke Macfarlane, The Prisoner of Christmas. Luke Macfarlane is the face of a very specific fantasy. If you have ever turned on the TV in December, you have seen him. Square jaw, warm eyes, the kind of man who shows up in a snowstorm with a flannel shirt and a cup of hot cocoa. He is the Hallmark king, the perfect, straight leading man. But Luke has been living in a golden cage for over a decade. He is openly gay, yet his career has been frozen in a perpetual state of seasonal romance. Hollywood looked at him and said, "You are too handsome to fire, but you are too gay to promote." So they kept him safe. They kept him small. For years, while his straight peers graduated to Marvel movies or gritty HBO dramas, Luke was contractually obligated to fall in love with a woman under the mistletoe over and over again. It wasn't until Bros in 2022 that he finally got to play a romantic lead as himself. But one movie doesn't erase 10 years of industry underuse. Luke Macfarlane is the proof that Hollywood will use your face to sell a lie, even while ignoring your truth. Wentworth Miller, The Man Who Walked Away. And finally, we arrive at the most powerful story of all. The man who didn't wait to be erased. He looked the machine in the eye and turned it off himself. Wentworth Miller had it all. As the star of Prison Break, he was an international icon. The glare, the tattoos, the intelligence. He was the definition of masculine mystique. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. He was the most valuable asset the network had. And then in 2013, he dropped the bomb. Not for attention, but for dignity. He came out in a letter rejecting an invitation to a Russian film festival in protest of their anti-LGBTQ laws. It was quiet, firm, and devastating. The industry didn't know what to do. The scripts for the action hero roles slowed down. He was no longer the blank slate fantasy. But Wentworth did something few actors ever dare to do. He rejected the fantasy. "I no longer want to play straight characters," he said. "Their stories have been told." Think about the weight of that. He walked away from millions of dollars. He walked away from Prison Break. He walked away from the A-list because he refused to trade his mental health for a close-up. He wasn't pushed out, he ascended. He sacrificed his career to show the next generation that you don't have to hide to be a hero. Wentworth Miller was the action star who refused to lie anymore. And in a town built on make-believe, that is the most radical act of all. So look at these 10 faces: Lee, Matt, Jonathan, Max, Andy, George, Brian, Kevin, Luke, and Wentworth. They didn't fail. They weren't untalented. They were simply inconvenient to a system that prefers a comfortable lie over a complicated truth. Erasure isn't an accident. It is a choice. But attention. Attention is a choice too. Hollywood might have turned the lights off on these men, but we are holding the torch. If you believe that talent should matter more than who you love, and if you believe that honesty should never cost a career, then don't let their names fade. Stream their work, buy the tickets, say their names, because the only way to break the silence is to make some noise. And this has been The Silent Purge. Don't forget to subscribe because we aren't done digging up the truth. See you in the next one.